All right. Hello again, everyone. My, how the world has changed since we last spoke. Before we get going today, I wanted to acknowledge the topic of our lives right now. I suspect some, and maybe even most of you, are going through a disruption in your day-to-day lives, both professionally and personally. While we navigate these challenges together, I found it fitting that today's webinar takes place in March, which is also known as Optimism Month. It's also National Certified Nurses Day, so a tip of the cap to all those nurses who are risking their own personal health to treat those afflicted by COVID-19. Wherever you are and whatever you're going through, we're glad that you chose to join us for a little slice of your day. And now on to our webinar. I mentioned some special observances just a moment ago, but believe it or not, it's also Data Innovation Day. And that is incredibly apropos because we're going to be discussing the latest market intelligence gathered by COGNITION Smart Data. It offers deep insights into consumer preferences that will enable you to improve your marketing, sales, product development, and competitive positioning. Here to walk us through that is our good friend, Sara Gutterman. She's the co-founder and CEO of Green Builder Media. Sara has established a reputation as a visionary thought leader and passionate advocate for sustainability. And she works closely with a diverse group of stakeholders in the building industry to develop impactful, long-term green strategies that are simultaneously sustainable and profitable. Sara is a former venture capitalist and has participated in a portion of the life cycle from funding to exit of over 20 companies. She graduated cum laude from Dartmouth College and holds an MBA in entrepreneurship and finance from the University of Colorado. Now, it says here that she lives in Lake City, Colorado with, it says here, her husband, someone named Ron Jones. I don't know, must be a nice guy. And she's also a county commissioner. In case you didn't know, we're going to find out right now that this webinar is being brought to you by PowerShift by NV Energy. You can never save too much energy or money, and that's why NV Energy has introduced PowerShift to help its residential and business customers conserve even more energy and save money on their power bills. PowerShift by NV Energy is also about providing you with excellent customer service. It's your one-stop shop to find all the energy-efficient products and services to help you boost your bottom line, along with convenient ways to manage your account. PowerShift Energy Advisors are dedicated to working side by side with business customers to discuss their needs and to find energy efficiency solutions that save money. Plus, their Business Solutions Center is the place to go to discuss your bill payments and account-related questions. For more information, please visit nvenergy.com/PowerShift. During the course of today's presentation, you can submit questions for Sara. Simply use the questions box that's probably on the right side of your screen. I'll review those questions and pose them to her during the Q&A time set aside after her presentation. Sara, it's good to talk with you again.
Thanks so much, Mike. It's so good to be here. I'm happy to be hosting one of our own webinars. Thank you to everyone who is listening in. Really nice to be able to share a little bit of time with you today. We've got a lot to cover, and I'm going to try to finish on time at the top of the hour. Usually this is a presentation that I like to spend at least 90 minutes on, sometimes a couple of hours. I'm going to just go through all of the data pretty quickly, and given what's happening in the world, it felt very irresponsible of me to not add a new section about the coronavirus and the economic impact that it will likely have on the home building industry, but not just the economic impact, but some additional potential systematic changes that we might see because of the coronavirus. So I've added more content and I've shortened the duration, so bear with me as we move through things pretty quickly, and of course happy to stay on the line at the end of the webinar to answer any questions that you may have. So for those of you who are not familiar with COGNITION Smart Data, I'm going to give you a quick overview of that just because most of the data and the insights that I will be sharing on today's webinar come from Cognition. So COGNITION Smart Data is Green Builder Media's suite of market intelligence and data services. We source data from two main places. The first is a proprietary technology platform that is artificial intelligence powered, that mines web and social media content using contextual filters and parameters and intellectual property that we have taught to the technology platform to look at trends, macro trends and micro trends that are based on things like purchasing patterns, behavioral preferences, sentiment, market drivers, and things that really shape shifting and evolving markets and market innovation and transformation. The second source of data comes from our unique audience of trade and consumers. These are early adopters and first movers, so when we collect metadata from our audience, it kind of gives us a crystal ball, so to speak, because we're looking at the spectrum of the market that is the leading edge. And so we can, by understanding where those folks are today and their preferences and their purchasing behavior, we can see where the mainstream is heading in the next 6, 12, 24 months. So cognition is a blend of those two data sets, one that reaches far beyond our own audience into that larger universe of web and social media, and the other is a deep vertical dive into our specific audience. So this next slide, again, just kind of talks about how we track macro and micro user-specific data. And then through cognition, the last thing I'll say about it is that one of the unique things that we do with cognition is we don't just stop at gathering the data, but we are able to apply our domain expertise that comes from 15 plus years of working with that leading edge, early adopter and first mover trade and consumer audience to turn data into insights, actionable recommendations, a few of which you'll hear in today's webinars. And then we're actually using all of these data and insights now to inform ourselves of how we can create better content and assets, but also, how we can share with our audience, with our partners, with our clients, information so that they can make more informed business decisions as well. So shifting into key trends and factors that are shaping the market today and will continue to do so into the future. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, it just felt really irresponsible of me not to address coronavirus, just at the outset. So let's talk for a minute about the projected and expected economic impacts of the coronavirus. I have been talking with economists and, voraciously reading as much as I can about the expected impact of the coronavirus on the economy. And most economists do agree that we're heading for a recession. Some feel that this will be what they're calling a short but sharp event, where there will be a stumble in the second quarter of this year, but then a quick recovery and rebound in subsequent quarters. Others project that we'll have a longer downturn throughout the rest of the year, but most agree that the fundamentals of the economy are sound, and so they don't actually anticipate at this point a huge long-term and prolonged recession. Now, again, I say at this point because the truth is, really, people don't know the full impact. We don't know if we're heading into full national lockdown with the coronavirus. We don't know from a global standpoint what the impact is going to be in China, in Europe, in terms of manufacturing and supply chain fulfillment. But today, given what most of the economists that I have spoken with are saying, they do feel like it's going to have a limited impact and not a long duration. In terms of the housing market, if we use history as our guide, previous pandemics have put the housing market on hold, right? Because if home buyers aren't actively viewing homes, they're likely not buying. But those pandemics haven't necessarily forced a decrease in home values or pricing. And so in that sense, the housing market has proven to be a bit resilient to pandemics. And also, just historically, when the stock market is going down, investors generally look for safer places to put money into, like bonds and real estate. Prior to the coronavirus outbreak, 2020 was expected to be fairly vibrant in terms of the housing industry. So yes, supply is short, but demand has been high due to low unemployment, solid wage growth, low mortgage rates, and high property confidence. And so even with the coronavirus, again, most of the economists that I have spoken with, indicate that the opportunistic buyers that have the appetite to buy can actually take advantage of low interest rates at this point. With that said, some fear that since home prices and valuations are already fairly high, will the recession take a group of buyers out of the market, price them out of the market? One other thing to note is that there has been a drop in reported in-person home buying inquiries over the past 2 weeks, according to the National Association of Realtors. But online interest has increased dramatically. So we'll see how that plays out for the home buying sector. With that said, even though there are some, there's some optimism incorporated into forecasts, we're saying that, building professionals should certainly brace for impact. There was an article distributed today that projected that this spring home sales could fall by 35%, decreasing the total annualized home sales to about 4 million, which is the lowest since 1991. But I think that there's certainly still some opportunity for building professionals and manufacturers, especially when planning for, when looking at opportunities like strategic land acquisition, building pipelines, developing relationships. And then something that really stands out for us is, now is not the time for building professionals or manufacturers to stick their heads in the sand, proverbially speaking. It rather is a time to strategize, to prepare, to consume data and information, to understand how you can come out of this on the other end, smarter, stronger, better. With that said, certainly we anticipate that there will be supply chain disruptions, inventory shortages, delays in inspections and permitting processes. And the labor shortages, this is an interesting one because while certainly we are expecting to see an increase in some unemployment in areas like retail, tourism, travel, we wonder if some of those folks are actually going to come into the construction industry if the construction industry continues to maintain a certain level of activity. When we look at consumer trends related to the coronavirus, it's pretty interesting because this is the first global pandemic that is unfolding online. There have been a huge amount of online mentions, over 1 billion online mentions. There's 20 million mentions of the coronavirus just on March 11th, which happened to be a pretty big day in terms of, WHO announcements and kind of a pivot in the Trump administration's approach to containment. Points of comparison when the NBA season was suspended, there were only 2 million social media mentions, or the total SARS mentions was 56 million. So this pandemic is getting a lot of attention online. People are using the internet to, share information, share their fears and anxieties, and then bide time. And in that way, as I mentioned, they're consuming a lot of data. But what we're finding is they are looking for reliable and factual information, right? They're not necessarily panic searching. They're looking for behavioral suggestions. How is the coronavirus going to impact their communities and their homes? And then we're seeing a big growing trend in people looking for financial relief, both in terms of small businesses as well as personal households. In terms of the people that are actually searching and talking about coronavirus, it's split fairly evenly, male and female. Younger and older age groups are fairly equally active. The folks that are searching for information about and talking about coronavirus are interested in things like family, politics, and religion. You can see the professional breakdown on the far right side. Interestingly, construction is not in here. It's further down on the list, and I couldn't grab the screenshot, because it was too far down on the list. And then interestingly, with respect to the trends that we are tracking, there is a huge correlation between coronavirus and people talking about water. We'll talk about that in a minute, but you can see the numbers below where when we look at coronavirus, and this is just over the last month, in comparison to the number of posts related to connected living, indoor air quality, and energy efficiency, water just blows everything else out of the water. Sorry, pardon the pun. Indoor air quality is a distant second. But, we can see some crosstabs and correlations. And what we are predicting as we analyze what is being said on the web and social media is that this moment in time when people are living at home, staying at home, cooking from home, homeschooling, we do believe that this will end up resulting in some behavioral modification. We anticipate that people are really going to start focusing more and more on health and wellness, certain lifestyle choices. We think that actually the remodeling industry, once things settle down, is going to see a boost because we think people are going to be cooking in their homes now and saying, maybe this kitchen design doesn't really work, or I don't really like my lighting. This task lighting, it just doesn't work the way I want it to, or I don't really like the color in this bedroom. We do think people are going to become more and more cognizant of indoor air quality. We're already starting to see a spike in home health care and telemedicine, as well as demand for fitness equipment, apps, and wearables. We think this also will affect connected living and will continue to elevate awareness for and demand for the growing ecosystem of smart home technologies. We think people will really start rethinking about their homes relative to home office spaces and design, flexible spaces for homeschooling. Clearly, we're going to see how our national infrastructure in terms of internet connectivity and bandwidth, whether it passes or fails this test. I think people are going to start thinking about privacy and bandwidth concerns. And perhaps people will say, hey, this working from home thing, I like this. Maybe I used to do it 1 or 2 days a week, but we anticipate that there may be a systematic change with respect to people deciding to ditch the commute, entirely or for the most part. And then, of course, I think all of this inevitably brings up questions in homeowners' minds about resiliency and self-sufficiency. How do they source their energy? How can they grow their food? And do they have proper storage in their homes, whether it's in their kitchens and pantries or other areas for essential supplies? Beyond the coronavirus, there are other market trends. It's kind of hard to see at this moment, but let's look at evolving audiences. And again, this is, coronavirus aside, we are seeing, and we've seen a growth in these numbers just, year after year. Consumers are now playing a central role in specifying products in their home up to 70% of the time in segments that they never used to specify products in before, like solar and insulation, getting all the way down to the brand. And that's interesting because as consumers have become more savvy, because they have more access to information on the internet, they are becoming more and more involved in that specification decision-making process. 10 years ago, when we would ask our trade audience how often consumers would play a role in specification decisions, they would say, maybe 10, 15% of the time in areas like plumbing fixtures and appliances. But now, clearly, that value equation has changed. And consumers not only are willing to spend money on energy efficiency upgrades, connected living. Now more and more we're seeing, devices to improve their indoor air quality and enhance their health and wellness. But they're also understanding that upfront investments will ultimately save money on energy and maintenance, and that those investments clearly yield value with respect to, healthy and sustainable living. In terms of trade professionals, we've seen clearly our audience, for the last 15 years, but now more and more building professionals are using sustainability, energy efficiency, and kind of connected living and solar as a value-added proposition that they can provide to their customers and as a differentiator. Now, clearly, some of that behavior is being driven by ratcheted codes and regulations, but we are also seeing a very real and tangible ROI from homes and buildings that are energy efficient, that have improved indoor air quality, and that are resilient, that can withstand nature's fury, whether that's wildfires or superstorms or flooding, et cetera. And then, of course, we are seeing the valuation metrics shifting from first cost to full cost, where we're seeing, green homes and buildings sell faster and for higher prices, and then also yield that meaningful ROI with respect to ongoing maintenance and operations. We are tracking a growing ethic of sustainability. We wanted to think we knew this a while ago, but now we actually have the data that shows what we thought we knew is actually true. So consumers are feeling the impact of climate change. They're acting accordingly. 62% of consumers that we survey claim that they are being impacted by climate change on a local scale. And usually that has to do with, again, weather-related and events and natural disasters. But that also includes, damaged ecosystems and, just a change in their surroundings. And then 66% of consumers that we have surveyed believe that the government is not acting fast or aggressively enough with respect to climate action. You can see consumers tell us that they are doing things like reducing food waste, reducing plastic use and water use, even eating less meat when we survey them. We all talk a lot about Millennials and Gen Zers, and these folks are talking about sustainability and climate change and green living online. You can see in that upper left chart, Gen Zers are the kind of burnt orange color and Millennials are the purple color. And they're, fairly equally as active. They're mad. They are upset because they feel like older generations have ruined the planet that they now inherit and have to grow up in. So they have, a fairly negative net sentiment with respect to talking about climate change. Most of the posts and chatter that they are posting online has to do with the fact that they believe that climate change is real, that it's a very viable possibility that there may be some kind of a climate collapse or disaster. They feel very positively about the Green New Deal and aggressive national policy to address climate change. They're worried about job security in light of climate change. Social justice is top of mind. They get that weather patterns are changing, and they're talking about people that are making bold commitments and acting boldly, like Greta, like Jeff Bezos at Amazon, of course, like Bernie. When we look at who's talking, within the Millennials and Gen Z audience, it's skewed more female than male. And interestingly, the top three professions of those Millennials, mostly Millennials, are hospitality, homemaker, and unemployed. Now, looking beyond audiences to specific market trends, we're going to cover energy, health and wellness, water, and connected living, just because we feel like those are four of the most impactful trends with respect to market transformation at this time. So clearly, energy efficiency investing is skyrocketing. It's as high as it's ever been. It's continuing to grow. $11 billion in energy efficiency investments in the U.S. alone in 2018. We don't have the full numbers for 2019 yet, but we know that those investments continue to grow substantially. And that's really because, it's kind of an all hands on deck effort to increase the energy efficiency of our built environment. That's coming from rebates and incentives, from, governments, municipalities, utilities. Of course, we've got a range of organizations that are involved in pushing energy efficiency and certainly net zero energy. And then same thing for demand side energy management. We're seeing broad coalitions of utilities, municipalities, manufacturers joining together to partner to provide not just enhanced energy efficiency programs, but also that demand side energy management offering that combines utility-based programs with things like weatherization systems, enhanced insulation, renewables, and smart technology. We think that this is going to start filtering also into the water arena, where we're going to start seeing, kind of non-traditional partnerships monitoring water use. We'll get some more into water in a minute. But we also think that the real white spaces here, of course, intuitively are states with high energy bills, because of course you're going to have more willing buyers of upgrades for energy efficiency products and systems and technologies, and also demand side energy management to lower energy use and frankly bills. But then we've also seen a direct correlation between weather extremes and comfort and the amount of money that homeowners are willing to invest to maintain that comfort, to maintain not just the energy use, but the comfort within their homes. Clearly, we're seeing a massive transition to net zero structures, with the global market projected to grow to almost $80 billion by 2025. This is spurred by a perfect storm of innovation in high performance products, price parity, and advancement in renewable energy, and then of course automation technologies, combined with ratcheted codes and policy. But we're seeing driving growth of net zero irrespective of geography, irrespective of climate zone, irrespective of political inclination, whether it's a red or a blue state or jurisdiction. Net zero is growing across the board. Probably not surprisingly, California and New York are the two states with the fastest growing net zero programs and adoption. And then interestingly, the numbers are growing exponentially year after year in terms of just the pure number of net zero projects, and larger multifamily buildings at this point represent about a little over 70% of the total net zero energy stock in the US and Canada. When we survey our readers, and this is a joint trade and consumer survey about why they would build or live in net zero energy homes, part of it is that they are interested in the economic payback and cost savings, but there is a very real interest in contributing to reduced emissions. So those are some trends we're following. And then when we've asked what zero energy housing programs they're most familiar with, DOE's Zero Energy Ready Home program tops the list, and then California's Title 24 is a close second. Beyond net zero, we're also seeing a pretty rapid shift towards electrification. What's interesting about electrification is that a good percentage of houses in the South are all electric now anyway. So clearly electrification is not, it's not partisan, it's not even that new. In fact, we mentioned Ron Jones. I was talking with Ron the other day, and he remembers when he was a young child in the Texas Panhandle, their utility promoting all electric homes back then. So, this is not something new, it's not scary, it's not anything that our industry needs to create myths around. There will be pushback against electrification by folks, we'll say in the gas arena, but I think we really need to work towards demystifying electrification, because a quarter of homes nationwide are already all electric, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. And this thing's coming, so we might as well get prepared, right? Kind of like what we said about the coronavirus. For certain people, brace for impact. We're seeing wide-scale adoption or broad-scale adoption in California. Just over the last handful of months, 13 municipalities like Berkeley and San Luis Obispo and Mountain View have created an all-electric code. And some of these codes actually ban natural gas hookups, while others, rather than banning, they're more of the carrot than the stick, offering incentives for density or other financial incentives for builders to go all electric. And then, of course, we couldn't have a conversation about energy without talking about renewables and solar in particular, because that is perhaps more important at this point with respect to the residential market. Interestingly, the cost to build new solar and wind facilities is now cheaper than building new fossil fuel and nuclear facilities, but soon the cost to build new solar and wind facilities will be cheaper than operating current fossil fuel facilities or nuclear facilities. That's interesting, because what happens to our economy then? Like, think about the transition when we've really hit, kind of that net positive cost impact for renewables, and we're very close to that. Of course, we're seeing aggressive renewable energy targets by governments and across the globe, and municipalities and states across the U.S., if not at the federal level. But I think that what we're going to start seeing is, as the solar market matures, which it is doing right now, because you can see there's ongoing consolidation of the industry. So, for example, SunPower is a great example. They used to offer a wide spectrum of solar-related products and services, from PVs to storage to installation. Now they are siloing. They actually spun off and separated their PV business from their battery storage and services business. So we're going to continue to see that market mature and innovate. They're going to continue to advance financing solutions that eliminate or at least address any upfront obstacles and investment requirements that might block adoption. And we're going to just continue to start seeing solar play a major role in our homes with respect to streamlining the production, storage, usage, and monitoring of energy. When we look at how people are talking about solar, we see that boomers and millennials are the two most active segments when talking about solar. But the way that those two audiences are different is that boomers talk about that they like solar, whereas millennials talk about that they want to buy solar. So it's a very different type of conversation. And again, just going back to energy discussion in general, interestingly, government legislation is a big driver of energy discussion. And in certain places like Nevada, we're seeing that people in Nevada want Nevada to go the way of California in terms of a mandate for solar installations in the residential market. We're seeing current events drive a big, as a major driver to energy discussions as well, mostly around renewables and energy efficiency, and then, of course, change of season when people start getting a little less comfortable and they need to start thinking about how to decrease energy load because of things like HVAC. And the last thing I'll say about energy is that, interestingly, as we track where consumers are talking about energy, it's actually on retail websites like Best Buy. and Amazon. They're having some pretty meaningful discussions about energy on those retail sites. So what we always suggest to our clients is, if you want to influence the conversation, go and send your subject matter experts to where it is happening. So monitor these sites, monitor the forums, monitor the blogs, and be a part of the conversation. Moving on to health and wellness, and there's lots of different ways we can address health and wellness. So for purposes of today's webinar, I'm just really going to focus on IAQ. So what we see is IAQ is just an exploding market opportunity, and there are very active conversations online with respect to IAQ. It's interesting because within our audience, we're actually seeing it shift from a nice to have to a must have. And as we survey our audience, and again, these are early adopters and first movers, they are telling us that IAQ, good indoor air quality, healthy home is as important now as location. And that's never happened before. It's always been location, location, location. But now, again, healthy home, IAQ is just right up there in terms of factors, the important factors for making home buying decisions. IAQ, as I mentioned, it's got a very high passion intensity. People feel really strongly about it, probably not surprisingly, because they're understanding how important IAQ is with respect to the health of their family and their children. So that connection is being made within the hearts and minds of consumers. We're seeing that generally speaking, adults over 45 are having more active conversations about the impact that IAQ has on their health and on the health of their parents and their grandparents. Females are talking about IAQ and health and wellness with respect to the threats to their family, whereas interestingly, males talk about IAQ more with respect to climate change. And of course, the growing focus on IAQ and health and wellness is placing some new demands on building professionals and manufacturers. And I think that's probably a good thing because it drives a discussion about holistic IAQ and health and wellness solutions in the home. You can see a heat map where the most active conversations about IAQ are happening. And again, this is over the course of last month. This shifts and changes, but this is just an interesting, point of reference. But I think the most important point about this IAQ discussion is that it's really becoming part of what homeowners believe is a fundamental right of ownership. It's a very active topic on Twitter, but forums and message boards also are important places where consumers are actually getting information about IAQ. As we shift into some consumer surveys, consumers right now believe that indoor air quality and, again, healthy homes is the #1 contributing factor to sustainability within their homes. So again, if you are a building professional, if you're a manufacturer, this is pretty important for you to take into consideration with respect to your offerings and your messaging and, frankly, new business opportunities. When we ask our consumer readers how important indoor air quality is to them, you can see the vast majority say that it's extremely or very important. And when we ask what their top IAQ priority is, generally speaking, it's that they want to keep themselves and their family healthy. When we ask what they use in their homes to improve their IAQ, we see non-toxic materials and finishes, and then ventilation and fresh air exchange systems as a very close second. Now, when we ask our builder readers about how whether or not homeowners are investing in indoor air quality, you can see that about 24% say that homeowners are very often or often investing in products, technologies, devices that improve indoor air quality, and that 42% say sometimes. What's important to note about this is that this was 0 a couple of years ago. So the fact that the very often and often category went from 0 to 24%, about a quarter of the market in just, maybe 2 years, shows a really large and substantial growth opportunity here. When we track trending indoor air quality topics, the number one thing that comes up consistently is indoor air quality monitors and sensors. And when we dig a little deeper, we see that consumers want proactive systems that improve the indoor air quality of their homes, that provide alerts and notifications, but that also go ahead and actually turn on ventilation fans or range hoods or even open a window when that sensor detects poor air quality in the home. So I mentioned in the beginning that we'll offer a couple of recommendations throughout this process because that's what we do with Cognition Smart Data. We always say kind of across the board when we're working with partners and clients that are trying to solve for indoor air quality that, the first thing that needs to happen in a dialogue with a homeowner or a home buyer is just situational awareness, right? Making sure that everyone understands what indoor air quality is, how it affects families, and then, how to address it within the home. Next is risk mitigation. So obviously utilizing, non-toxic materials, cleaning air, proper ventilation, but then also incorporating those smart home technologies and automated technologies that are going to reduce risk and improve indoor air quality, and then that ongoing monitoring and management, because it's fine if you build a really healthy home, but unless you are monitoring it on an ongoing basis, it's not going to stay that way. We are seeing codes shift that are starting to more stringently address indoor air quality. So look for those in the 2021 code cycle and beyond. We're actually starting to see municipalities across the country really shift a focus on indoor air quality. So I think we're going to start seeing, as I said, kind of a lot more attention on indoor air quality moving forward. Moving on into water trends. What I like to say is if you are in the building industry, if you work in a building, if you live in a house, or if you breathe, you need to be focused on water, because this is absolutely the issue of our moment, beyond coronavirus, of course, but in general, water is the topic of our time that we need to solve for, that we haven't yet solved for. I feel like in a lot of ways we've solved for energy. I mentioned, we're reaching a net positive cost equation for renewables. That is not the case yet with water technology and innovation. And so, we really have to shift our focus on the urgent need to solve for water. Because at the end of the day, for those of us in the building industry, if there's no water, there are no permits. It is the number one potential limiting factor to growth across the board. We're already starting to see water moratoriums in places like Bainbridge Island. I mean, it's an island, for heaven's sakes, right? You wouldn't think they would have a water moratorium. It's in the Pacific Northwest. So even in unlikely places, we're starting to see water become a prohibiting factor to growth. And interestingly, while water is indeed a global issue, it actually has to be dealt with and managed on a local level. So every project is going to have a unique set of water challenges. And while we can apply best practices and certain innovations across the board to projects, there really will be a combination of, of decisions based on that area's water quality, availability, local governance requirements, what's appropriate for local ecosystems, what are the weather patterns and extreme weather events that particular area or jurisdiction experiences. So it is, there are going to be a lot of gray areas and a lot of diverse solutions based on where projects are located. But with that said, as I mentioned, this is indeed a global issue. And when we survey our consumer readers, they realize that the water crisis is imminent and is absolutely paramount. So when we ask our consumer readers what their, to identify their global risks of highest concern, you can see water crisis is number one. Profound social instability is on the far right, and that's, kind of the least, the highest concern in terms of global risks. So this was a pretty interesting point of reference for us. When we look at what is driving water discussion, we're seeing leaks and within homes, leaks and monitoring, water quality, water damage, water rates. These are all things that are trending pretty high. You can see in the mix of sources here, people are less active on Twitter than they are in some other topic areas, more active in blogs and news and forums. It's skewed a little more male than female in terms of folks talking about water and water innovations and solutions. But then when we kind of drill down into what people are talking about, what they're looking for, leak detection and water monitoring systems right now are exploding online in terms of innovative solutions people are looking for, growing interest in gray water. Water conserving and low flow plumbing fixtures, that's a pretty steady and constant topic area. Smart irrigation systems also right up there. And then we're starting to see some pretty interesting things like atmospheric generators that pull water out of the air to supply fresh water for homes and communities. That's a growing trend. We're starting to see some of those hit the market. They look like solar, some of them look like solar panels, but they actually are atmospheric generators. Of course, with respect to water, we're just seeing, major changes in policy and regulation, mostly at a state and municipality level. We are seeing, like, for example, at a state level, I'm sure many of you have heard about California's commitment to limit water use to 55 gallons a day. That is incredibly aggressive, considering that right now, Santa Fe, New Mexico has the most aggressive and lowest per capita water usage, and that's at 87 gallons per day. One of the next lowest municipalities is Las Vegas at around 200 gallons per day. So we're seeing a lot of commitments and then a lot of innovative action around water policy, water pricing, and water programs. Another example we like to cite is the Front Range in Colorado, where water prices have increased by about 400% over the last handful of years. And the city of Arvada is no longer actually offering or allowing or approving permits unless builders and developers can show a net neutral impact to the water supply. So again, lots of activity in the water space. And of course, ratcheting codes go along with that activity. So look for more of those in the 2021 cycle and beyond. And then we're seeing the emergence of water-related programs. So our moderator, Mike Colignan, who's the executive director of the Green Builder Coalition, was a active participant in the development of the WERS program. If you want to learn about the WERS program, I highly encourage you to talk with Mike. It's a very comprehensive program that monitors indoor and outdoor water usage. It's being adopted by municipalities in the US and in Canada. Of course, ResNet's coming out with their HERS H2O program, and there are other programs as well. We really believe that water is going to go the way of energy in terms of water ratings becoming as important as energy ratings for not just meeting codes, but also for understanding the water performance of a home, especially as we see water bills and water pricing start to increase, frankly, so that we can more appropriately account for the cost of water. So finally, we're going to move into connected living trends. Clearly, we are in an entirely new era of connected living, right? So smart home technologies are offering homeowners new levels of control over their homes. And so they're turning homeowners from passive energy users into active energy managers. And that goes now for water, it goes for indoor air quality. And what we're seeing is that, what we used to call kind of the mindless home, where, in the early nascent phases of connected living, there were these devices that all had separate apps that you'd have to just control separately. That evolved to the mindful home, where these devices were now integrated by voice control like Alexa. But now, we're moving into what we're calling the intuitive home. So these are central hubs that connect devices and really streamline resource use, improve indoor air quality, and improve the performance of a home without even human interaction, right? So they're programmed to take human error out of the equation. And that's an exciting time, both in terms of, home performance and all of the benefits that offers with respect to cost savings and comfort and convenience, but also in terms of, just really thinking innovatively about how we can take the way that we live in our homes to a new level. And that goes back to some of those systemic changes we feel are going to happen as people are spending more time in their homes right now. So, some of these connected living statistics and market numbers are fairly staggering, right? So, 40% of Americans currently use smart home technology in their homes. Americans will spend $90 billion on smart home devices by 2023. Once a homeowner purchases a smart home device, they're 70% likely to purchase another one, and 60% of home buyers will pay more for a smart home, right? Those are pretty undeniable numbers in and of themselves. When we look at the segments that are really driving the smart home market, it's similar to the solar market, actually. Of course, it starts with millennials. These folks are, incredibly tech savvy. They basically expect smart homes now. Right now, millennials comprise 37% of the housing market, and about 3/4 of that group plan to actually buy a home in the next 5 years. Half of those, and I actually think that number's low, but half of them report that they're looking for a smart home. And again, they're super familiar with smart devices. The other segment that's driving connected living is active adults. And this is really to address aging in place, because I think that what we have seen is that there is a proven ROI when it comes to investing in smart home technologies that enable active adults to age in place and stay in their homes longer, as opposed to paying an assisted living facility on a monthly basis. So that upfront investment in smart home technology actually makes a lot more sense from a financial standpoint. So when we think about aging in place, we call this assisted living technology. These are motion sensors, cameras, monitors on refrigerators and toilets, so that, say, children or grandchildren can make sure that their parents and grandparents, those active adults, are actually getting up and they're active in their homes. And, again, this is another undeniable audience segment where, there's 46 million people that are 65 or older in the U.S., and that will continue to grow to about 67 million people by 2050. Convenience is really a big driver with respect to connected living. So anything that can be installed to save time and make homes more convenient is something that's really important to consumers. In terms of specific must-have categories, security tends to be the #1 thing that people are looking for, and that's cameras. It's those proactive systems that I mentioned. It's also data security. Thermostats, of course, have been and will continue to be a main driver for connected living purchases. We are, as I said, seeing a growth in health and wellness related demand, connected living device demand. lighting, of course, and then water monitoring and leak detection. You can see this is a recent consumer survey that asked about the most desirable home categories, of course, security, thermostats, indoor air quality. And then when we look at why consumers are purchasing smart home devices, it's, improve energy efficiency, address security concerns, allow remote check-in so people can check on their kids and their pets. But you can see saving money is much lower down in the value proposition to these home buyers and homeowners that we have surveyed. Kind of the elephant in the room with respect to connected living has to do, first of all, with connectivity, right? So they have devices that don't connect together. There are unforeseen glitches, things are difficult to use. And I think we're going to start seeing changes in that as manufacturers in the space unify standards and protocols and, open up APIs and find ways to integrate together. But the big elephant in the room is security, right? It's security and it's privacy. And, because consumers at the end of the day don't really know the biggest yellow piece of this chart right here, they don't really know if their smart home data is protected. And then the purple, the next biggest segment, are consumers that say that their data is not protected. So clearly, that's a big area of opportunity. We're going to see a lot of connected living innovations. This is just an incredibly exciting area, things like ambient computing, where instead of having a central PC, we're going to have sensors and monitors and interactive capabilities in everything, walls and, appliances and mirrors and, all the things that we, see in Minority Report and other cool movies. And we'll continue to see advances in artificial intelligence, geolocation services, not just geofencing, but geolocation within a home. So, rooms will shut down if they don't sense occupants in those. But lots of innovation here. And we think that, again, there's just going to continue to be a tremendous amount of advancement in connected living. So just keep an eye on that. And if you have an opportunity to get involved, this is one of the areas that we feel will be one of the most impactful in the home building industry. So, I got through everything pretty quickly. Mike, not sure if there are questions, but I know we have a couple minutes left, and I'm happy to answer anything that's come up.
Sure, yeah. And like Sarah said, the call for questions is out to our audience. I know I've got a couple. You talked about bandwidth early on, and maybe this is a question you're not able to answer, and if it's not, it's okay. But I'm curious as to how prevalent 5G is right now, because I'm just wondering if we do experience some kind of bandwidth challenges, I wonder if that will accelerate 5G installations. So your thoughts on that?
So Mike, that's a great question, and I have to preface this by saying I am not an expert. I was actually more of an expert when I was in venture capital and we were doing telecom and internet infrastructure deals in terms of, what the leading edge technology was, but I've been out of that market for quite some time. From what I hear though, from what I hear, the telecommunications companies and, kind of the internet companies have extra capacity that they have built for that we are not currently using. And their plan is to open up that bandwidth capacity, especially right now, given the change in our needs. But I think in terms of 5G, I honestly don't know if, the coronavirus and, what's happening right now is going to spur companies to usher that in faster, or if, there's going to be kind of more pressing needs for those companies to focus on fulfilling the bandwidth with the systems that are in place. And 5G will continue on the same timeline or even, be delayed a bit. But it's a great question, and unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that.
Oh, it's okay. You also talked early on about some of the cities that were focusing on electrification. Deborah from our audience wanted to share that over 29 cities now in California have approved legislation that focuses on electrification. So it certainly is a trend that everybody should be paying attention to. We also had a question from Michael in our audience. He wanted to know, because you were talking about IAQ monitors working with smart controls to either automate or optimize air quality behind the scenes. Are there any platforms out there now that you're aware of?
There are. Panasonic is releasing, kind of in the process of releasing an integrated system called Cosmos, and that uses what's called a FUBOT air monitoring system that connects with Panasonic vent fans and ERVs and range hoods to proactively turn the ventilation systems on when the sensor, senses CO2, VOCs, dust, and other things that contribute to poor indoor air quality. So there are some systems like that. I think we're going to start seeing a growth in that. I know also there are some HVAC companies like Trane that are coming out with kind of whole home HVAC and ventilation solutions with the upfront monitoring element. Trane's program is called Tranquility. And, rather than just being an HVAC system, it's really, again, that kind of more integrated whole home solution. I did also just real quickly want to go back to the electrification comment. So thank you for the clarification, and I will update my slide as well as my research in terms of the number of jurisdictions in California that have approved or adopted net zero codes and policy. I will say Heidi Harmon, who is the mayor of San Luis Obispo, gave a really great presentation at our sustainability symposium in January. And if anyone is interested, she kind of gave a great summary of the process by which San Luis Obispo decided to adopt, a net zero energy code, and just some highlights on how they're going to move forward with that. So my email address is up on the slide here. If any of you are interested in that, I can send you a link to that video. It was a really great and short presentation.
And Deborah shared a link with us via the questions box. So Deborah, if you could send that link to Sara on the email address that is displayed there, I'm sure she would appreciate that. I've got a question for you too, Sara. The insight provided through Cognition is incredibly impressive. I mean, really rich. How is Cognition any different than any other big data or smart data platforms?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I love talking about Cognition. So there's two things that really differentiate Cognition. The first is we have spent the last 2 years developing Cognition with a very specific set of intellectual property that makes this data relevant to the building industry. And so specifically, again, we're looking at market trends, market transformation, innovation. We bring in code information, policy information that you're just not going to get from like a standard data provider, whether that is kind of a market trends provider or social listening platform. So the fact that Cognition is very specifically targeted to the built environment and understanding what impacts the built environment and performance and trends, that's the first factor of differentiation. The second one is that, again, unlike a lot of other data services, which is just basically dump data at your door, we don't just stop at the data. We take the data, we turn it into insights, into actionable and meaningful recommendations for our partners and our clients. And then we're actually able to turn all of that into content that we drive through our channels to help craft and shape a dialogue about these different topic areas and about these trends, both to building professionals, whether those are builders and developers or architects or even manufacturers, as well as consumers. So we're actually able to use our own data to influence the market and to drive the trends even further and propel them. So it becomes a very virtuous cycle.
All right, I want to put a final call out there for questions from our audience. I do have one more, Sara, and it's kind of more of asking your thoughts on this. Trying to look forward a little bit, like we all are, to figure out what's going to happen. And I just wonder if we do see an increase in telecommuting coming out of this, and I think that we will too. I agree with you. I wonder if we're going to see a little bit of a slowdown in commercial construction as companies decide that they don't really need as big of an office as they once had. Do you see that as a possibility too?
I think all things are on the table right now. I do think that there may be an impact on some of the more traditional commercial approaches to office parks and office buildings. With that said, telecommuting might involve working from home, but it may also be more of a distributed model where, for folks who need to get out of their home or want to get out of their home to work, might follow more of a, again, satellite office or distributed model, something like a WeWork where it's shared office spaces. So, it could be if people decide that they don't want to fully work from home, they want to have some, social engagement, but they maybe just don't want to commute an hour or two in some cases to, a central headquarters, but rather they just go 5 minutes down the street to, a shared office space. That could be a model that emerges as well, in which case, there might be a net zero impact on the commercial office, the commercial building space.
Well, and it would certainly be encouraging from an emissions standpoint too. If we can somehow figure out how to reduce those 1 and 2 hour commutes. And I know we're starting to see some preliminary information on the environmental impact that coronavirus has had as far as, reduced air pollution. And so, there's not a lot of silver linings at the moment, at least it seems, but that appears to be one of them.
Yeah, and in fact, I wrote a piece last week that went out in our weekly Vantage newsletter, and it's up on our website, about how NASA actually showed some pictures and studied the impact of pollution in China, and how pollution levels have fallen over the last couple of months in China because of the coronavirus and kind of the national lockdown there, more than any other single event ever since NASA has been tracking, such things. We're also starting to see, dramatic decreases in emissions in places like Italy and throughout Europe. So you're absolutely right. Well, there's really not any silver lining here. At least we can give a very small cheer for temporary reductions in emissions. With that said, I have also spoken with some economists who think that there may be what they're calling a rebound effect, especially in China, where some of those factories actually are ramped up for a period of time to make up for, the lost time, which may end up, again, kind of creating larger emissions in the future. But certainly, I think, we're seeing some decrease, and hopefully that will lead to some of those systematic changes.
Well, I don't see any other questions. So, Sara, I really want to thank you for taking the time to walk us through Cognition and show us just the power of that platform. It was really quite impressive. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike. Thanks as always for being such a wonderful moderator, and thanks again to everybody else who attended. Appreciate your time, and feel free to shoot me an email if you have any further questions.
And I want to make sure to also say thank you to NV Energy for their generous sponsorship of this and many of our other webinars. Speaking of other webinars, our next webinar will be on Wednesday, April 1st at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and that's no April Fool's joke. We'll be talking about the electrification wave and its implications on the building community with my friend Steve Byers. That will be his first time on the webinar series, so I hope you'll make him feel welcome. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and take care of yourself and your family.